Good afternoon, Scott Baker.
Mikey Ames, how are you? It is time to talk about excellence. That's the title of the field note, and lead better. We look at the day's field note. This one would be for Thursday, July 3rd. That's when we're doing this live, and people could listen to it later, but stay. If you've read the field note, then you're up to speed. If not, we'll recap it a little bit and then see where we go to unpack it.
Right. So if you're getting this in your email inbox for the first time as well, we are doing these live conversations on Substack, but we're also streaming it to a few other places at the same time. So if this is the first time you've seen it in your inbox like this, is because the first time we've allowed it to be sent out that way. So
yeah, dynamite. We've done them for years in other variations. But the fun part about this one, when we hear a title like In Search of Excellence, for many people, not you youngins, it's a callback to a bestseller Tom Peters wrote, many decades ago. And by the way, he's still around and kicking. He interacts with us on X, and it's great. I mean, he's still out there trying to talk about the power of leaders who really develop people. Wonderful. The twist in this one is, we have this natural job, and I want to be excellent. This is probably about me, right? It's kind of like, isn't this song about you? This is actually more about how leaders spot excellence.
The talent search of excellence, right?
Exactly right. But I do think that as we kind of come through this, it's a little bit inspiring in how we look at ourselves, because we're going to cover some of the foundations of competence, how we would spot those in others. And I think that there's probably a few pieces in there that people haven't really contemplated enough. And certainly when we get to those four, you'll kind of say, all right, how do I measure up? You're going to do that.
Right. So when we talk about the foundation of the highest competence in any role, having to do with aptitude and knowledge, experience and drive, is that from Tom Peters' research initially as well?
No, I don't think that we're drawing on that in this particular field note, although the idea there, and I think we would all say, which is, well, what constitutes excellence in any area? You'd have to have some aptitude for it. You can't just go on natural talent. You have to go about developing knowledge, a base of skill level around a certain thing, but then you have to put that into the real world. That's the experience part. And you can have all of that and still be a total failure because you just don't get out of your chair. There's just no drive there. And that, sometimes you have to kind of gauge yourself. Well, where's my passion for this? And we can talk about how do we develop that in other people. That actually is a really big question that leaders are coming to us all the time. So we could go in there. But again, when you look at these four elements, the aptitude, the knowledge, the experience, the drive, the field note underlines it. Those are just table stakes.
Right.
It just starts to get interesting at this point.
Right. So the idea of excellence being born or made, that's a philosophical question that, like leadership, which is normally that trope is used for, excellence can kind of be put in the same framework there. And we're saying, aptitude might feel a little bit like it's a born innate quality, but other than that, everything else can be built on. I mean, it's more a skill than anything else, right?
Oh yeah. And we actually had an internal debate in our Slack channel yesterday around something we've talked about for years, at Admired Leadership, which is some people, kind of come to this idea. I had put something on an X post yesterday about the idea of character, right, and competence, and then commitment, which is kind of a drive element there, which is, all right, we assume at certain levels that people are technically competent at their jobs. And then we're really trying to evaluate their character as leaders. Sometimes leaders get confused about the fact that I am competent. I have a great degree of competency. I have 2 master's degrees, or I was, I not only was an all-star in college, and that's why I'm now the coach of the team, whatever it is. But then you say, well, how are you at the competency of leadership? Because that's also not something that's just an aptitude. It also takes the knowledge and the experience and the drive to say, I need to get better at all of these things. Now, that's a whole other field note that we won't get all into. But right now, it is a function of saying, if you as a leader are trying to spot excellence, develop excellence, you need to focus on the skill of doing that. And that's where we're at here.
Right. So instead of just saying, like, a lot of times we say excellence knows how to identify excellence. Excellence can spot it in the room. that's a shorthand way of being able to say you don't necessarily have to take responsibility for it. We don't actually believe that, right? Here's a way that if you're struggling with spotting excellence, maybe somebody's charisma is distracting you from the idea of I don't really
Right.
know if they're excellent or not. There's a fun little thing that you can do in an interview process that helps you to be able to identify whether or not the person you're dealing with has just prepared really well for the interview, right? Or maybe they, show up excellent in every area of their lives. And I
Yeah.
like it. I like it a lot.
Now, you said a fun little thing. Fun or cruel? How exactly are
Well,
you
some
defining
people would
this?
call it cruel. Like, I don't know if show me tests are in vogue these days or not, right?
Probably, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It seems like everything moves so fast that you're trying to be like, can I get a body into the chair? Now, I know that
Right.
there's some selectivity going along right now, and there's some reticence in hiring and all of that, which gives employers more options or even coaches on teams. But really, how do you do a show me? And a show me, as you mentioned, is really like just demonstrate it, because we ask for some track record. Tell me about some
Mhm.
things you've done. Maybe if you're a writer and you're hiring, if you're an editor and you're hiring writers, show me some examples of things that you've written. And those things can demonstrate it, but they can also be very misleading. And I can give you a very specific example about how I did this in some prior roles. But when you say, I need to see you in action doing it,
Mhm.
that's a different level. And part of the equation here is not only do you get a better sense of the person if they're able to do the thing you're asking them to do, but are they willing to do it?
Right. So if you're hiring for more than just the competency in the role
Mm-hmm.
itself, but maybe it's the type of hire where, man, I need somebody to be entrepreneurial, to invent
Mm-hmm.
with me in this seat. And I don't know if they're just going to be a hard worker for all time, right? That's the kind of questions that come up for a lot of us. Now, there's other roles where you're not looking at that so much. But some of these crucial roles, like how gritty a person is, like whether or
Mm-hmm.
not they're going to
Right.
show up and really be excellence in the areas that are not necessarily in the job description, right?
Yes.
Because
Right.
I don't know how to write this job description, but I do know that I want a person who will be able to grow with me as the role takes off. Then, those kinds of nebulous areas, you might feel a little guilty about not being able to fill out the job description completely the way that you should,
Right.
right? So go ahead and do an excellent job on the job description as much as you can. But here's a helpful tip on how to be able to spot somebody who can grow with you in that role.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's really is a nice element, even before you get to the show me test, these should be things that are just part of your natural style of inquiry anyway. You're meeting a new
Mhm.
person, you're talking to somebody at a conference, and they're not even applying for a job. You're just probing for excellence. Like
Right.
you're looking for the clues around that. And one of the things that is true is that people who are desiring to excel, right? They're looking for a way to excel, tend to look for ways to excel all the time in every
Right.
direction. They
Yes.
don't just want to be good at this. They have hobbies, they have other interests, and they're always pursuing those. And so rather than you coming to me, and I use the example of maybe an editor who's hiring a writer saying, how are you getting better at being a writer? Are you copying longhand, sections from great writers? Are you
Right.
going to taking extra classes? How are you, tell me, are you always, how are you using, AI and all that? That's, okay, great. We're going to find out what your attitude and your philosophy of excellent writing is. But if along the way I've gotten a sense that like maybe you played tennis in college, or maybe you have, your grandmother owned an Italian restaurant and you were really passionate about cooking. Well, if I'm
Yeah.
asking you and leaning in on some of the things that you've just shared, you're just trying to be a 360 person in a job interview. But again, this could happen just in people that you meet in their everyday life, being like, that's really so have you only done Italian cooking? Have you gone into other areas? And then, there was a period of time where I would spend months on a particular kind of cuisine, right? And then I would move on to another one and I'd master that area. And so part of it is saying, if I can sense that you're always trying to get better at multiple things in your life, you are likely to be always trying to get better at the kind
Right.
of things that I need you to be excellent at in this role.
Right. Right. And it is the kind of person that
Mhm.
we've thought of as our core demographic that even wants to buy like the
The
products
lifelong
and
learner,
services
right?
that we call them lifelong learners. These people
Yes.
who they seem to like always be doing something new. Their New Year's resolution always has to do something with, adding a language to their repertoire, adding an instrument, doing something
Sure.
where that puts them in a spot where they're learning something new. And so being an excellent student is something in that. But the real key here is specifically, I mean, we've kind of talked all around it, but we haven't put it into like a 1 or 2 sentence recommendation. And it is mentioned in the field note. It's this idea of spotting excellence in that other thing that they're passionate about. So what's the right kind of question that you might ask, Scott, that kind of allows somebody to talk about their passion? Like, because you mentioned that you might start this conversation outside of the framework of a job interview. So when you're getting someone to talk about that, what kind of question do you use to actually bring those things up?
You're being a little bit of an excellence detective here, right? And it doesn't have to be, like where you're do people remember Columbo that Peter Falk played, where he'd ask the sort of off the cuff question at the end? That was the real question.
One more thing.
Yeah. But you're a Sherlock here. So, but really, you should be a detective for excellence all the time. So that just simply means these are low stakes things where you just start to lean in a little bit. And so if you're sharing something, and I say, well, tell me a little bit more. How did you get started doing that? How did you ever get involved in that? Where did that come from? Just start kind of going in a low stakes way. And those openings will just naturally happen. People will share what they're interested in. And probably the easiest thing is to say, what's been really exciting you lately? Even if somebody you've just met, but if you're saying, what have you been reading? What have you been doing? What have you been focusing on? And some people have very weird hobbies, and we don't need to go into the whole Lego thing, but, but
that's a great way to say it though. Like if you're at a dinner party with people that you don't know, the default question is, so what do you do?
Yes. Right.
Just kind of twist that a little bit into
what else do you do?
Right. Or, if you say something like, what wakes you up in the morning? That allows somebody to be able to answer the question with what they do. Or they could be very literal in the way they answer that question. Right. But if they're with you on your wavelength of like, what wakes you up in the morning? And there's plenty of ways to ask about people's passions. That really is a great way to allow people the freedom to be able to say what they're really passionate about.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to talk about what they're passionate about?
They will. They'll unpack that. Well, let's go back real quick to the idea of show me tests, just to kind of give a little bit of flavor and some traction for folks that might be thinking about how to dive into that. Now, in our firm, where we have 100 folks or so, and really high level leadership coaches, really high level strategic communications advisors, but we're advising people that are leading in athletics, they're leading nonprofits, and they're all of these areas. So there's a coaching aspect to what you're doing. There's an aspect of leading dialogue. There's an aspect of maybe you're doing keynote talks and that kind of thing. Right. There's other things around the nature of research, as we would hire people that come into our firm that do some of that. So we sometimes say, well, we need you to do a complete summary of this particular book. We want to see how well you do at that. We'd like you to lead at our next meeting a dialogue in the room with all of the people that would be your colleagues around some provocative topic. We need to see you in action doing that. And then we kind of gauge, how did you do? Now, I remember back when I was in television news for the first 20 years of my career, then digital news for about the next 10 years. But I would often, if somebody came in and said, here are some stories that I've written. Now it's hard to it's different from a magazine article to say, here's a story that I wrote for television news. You would show a video of the story that you did, or that you were the reporter or writer. But even then, I'm getting an artificial best of, right? And so what I need to say is, I need you to go sit down over at this keyboard, and I'm going to give you printed out here raw copy on 3 different stories, and I need you to write, and I need it to be this, however long it's going to be. This is going to be 45 seconds a copy on a teleprompter. I need you to summarize and make this story a perfect 45 seconds, and I need you to do that 3 times, and I'm going to come back in a half an hour. Right. So I'm giving you basically 10 minutes of story, which isn't an enormous amount of time, but it's enough time to do that job.
And this is an everyday task.
And that's an everyday task. So in that sense, I would get a much better picture of who that person is than just looking at their resume tape or just talking with them and being like, "Ah, this is a really terrific person." And then I might get sort of nervous, like, "Oh, I'm being mean if I make them go do the test."
Right.
But then they'll fool me, right?
Yeah.
So whatever you can do to put somebody in action to some degree, and this is all the more important now in the age of AI, right? And college teachers are doing this now all the more. It kind of goes back to the way they used to do college back at, I don't know, in Oxford and Cambridge, where it's, we're going to get you all in a room and talk about stuff. And you need to be able to talk intelligently.
Right.
It's not the thing that you wrote with the help of ChatGPT. Let's do a little bit more of that. When you do, you're a great excellence detective. When you surround yourself, as the field note says, in a room with excellent people in an organization, then pretty soon this learning and feedback, and we didn't even get to that once you get over those 4 sort of factors of aptitude, knowledge, experience, and drive, what really happens is if you've got confidence but a low ego, you're going to be seeking out feedback. And that feedback's going to inform how you make iterations and slowly get better at those things. That's where people get messed up on the 10,000 hours. It's not just 10,000 hours to excellence. It's feedback and iteration and application and over and over and over again. Those are the kind of people we're looking at.
Right. So we can start this with our interview process, but you mentioned it a few times, being an excellence detective. This is something you don't have to wait for the next time you're in an interview room to do this. You can start your conversational cadence reflecting some of these things even before. The behavior will show up in everything that you do and not just in the interview room.
Yeah.
So why not do a little bit of it tomorrow when you're around the grill, contemplating losing fingers and eating hot dogs, right?
I mean, in the end, I know we're 2 minutes over here, but we in our firm, as we look for admired leadership behaviors, which is the things that are kind of our bread and butter of why we have hundreds of these that have made the difference for many, many major leaders around the world. You have to be a detective for those things all the time because you're trying to do pattern matching that isn't just like, oh, that's a good idea. What you're looking for is that's a good idea. And I've now seen that in this person and that other person and a little bit in this teacher over here and a little bit in the coach that teaches my kids team. You're looking and you're saying, oh, there's a commonality here that's a universal. That's what you're looking for.
Right. Great. All right. Thanks very much. For those of you that are in the States, happy birthday to you.
Happy 4th of July Eve tonight, right? Today.
Yeah.
And then maybe you'll listen to this tomorrow, but
All
holiday weekend for many people here in the US anyway.
Many. All right. We'll talk tomorrow.
Thanks, Mikey.
Bye now.